I would like to get back a little bit to the Estonian situation right now. You mentioned Russian diaspora, and I wanted to ask you how the situation and how these restrictions really affected on their behavior. I mean, knowing that in Baltic countries there are lots of Russian-speaking groups of people that were behaving kind of independently, even in the state, not knowing the language of the state and having their own points of view on the geopolitics and so on. Because from even my communication with some people in Lithuania, I was very surprised that they really don't even have an idea to learn the language, the Lithuanian language. So how have the restrictions now, during the war, changed the situation with this group of people in Estonia, and how your government, through the legislative departments, affecting the situation?
Yeah, it was indeed a problem because at the time of Soviet occupation, a very big number of Russian people were brought to Estonia, which was, of course, direct violation of international humanitarian law. At the time of collapse of Soviet Union, in Estonia, for example, there were approximately 30% of Russians. In Latvia, it was 40% of Russians. Lithuania, it was has the smallest percent, approximately 10%. But in Latvia, Estonia, it was really heavy numbers. Furthermore, some areas like, for example, in Estonia, Ida-Virumaa, which is northern east, in the city Narva, there are only 3% of Estonians, because the city was completely demolished by Russian bombings during Second World War, by Soviet bombings. Estonian population fled from there and never returned. So that's why it's a kind of enclave. In Tallinn, in the capital of Estonia, also approximately up to 40% of Russian population. And problem was that Russian population here is very diverse. Estonia was always a leader of freedom of speech and freedom of internet. According to the freedom of speech, it was in top 10. As to the freedom of internet, it's compete with Iceland for first and second place, just changing the position. That's why for many years Russian propaganda was not anyhow limited here. Those Russian channels were fully presented here in Estonia, always Russian propaganda, and many Russian people, indeed, as you have mentioned, they didn't study Estonian language. Very often they do not speak Estonian language, only Russian, so they fully this Russian propaganda paradigm, respectively, clearly that they were in support of Russian Federation, of Putin, later of occupation of Crimea, which was clearly international crime, and now also still there are pretty significant number of people who support Russia in this war. There were some sociological polls, but results were not announced, probably not to make attention in Estonia, but same poll was in Latvia. There the situation is very similar to Estonia, and if 90% of Latvians support Ukraine, only 1% of Latvians support Russia, and approximately, respectively, 9% kind of neutral. As to the Russians in Latvia, approximately 20% support Ukraine, 20% support Russia, clearly, and also the rest, approximately 60%, they kind of neutral, but we clearly understand what this neutrality means. So it clearly shows the difference between Latvian population and Russians in Latvia. So I'm pretty sure that percentage in Estonia more or less the same, because as I said, situation in Latvia and Estonia are very similar. What was done actually after the beginning of full-scale invasion in February 2022, Estonia finally limited Russian propaganda. Because actually we should always keep in mind that limitation of propaganda of war is not violation of human rights. Because if we will look to the ICCPR, the National Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights, we will see that after Article 19, which is dedicated to the freedom of speech, the next article is Article 20, which clearly says that propaganda of war should be prohibited. as well as certain forms of hate speeches. And it's not even right of the state, it's a direct obligation of the state. So that means that limitation of propaganda of war is not violation of freedom of speech anyhow. Unfortunately, it's happened now only last year, but still now Russian propaganda channels are not available anymore on the television, on all these cable providers, even thanks to some most voicy propaganda websites and internet, is also limited. That, of course, changed a bit situation. Of course, the inertia of this previous brainwashing could not disappear in 1 day or even 1 month or 1 year, but still now people have different sources of information. In particular, in Estonia, there are now several Russian-speaking medias, including Estonia National Broadcasting, which is organized on BBC principles. So they have now Russian TV channel, they have Russian radio, there are also a number of Russian websites, both national or private ones. So that's why people now can have full range of adequate information and have a possibility not to be under the permanent influence of Russian propaganda. Of course, with most pro-Russian people, they can find information always on the internet, and 21st century could not block anything, but at least you should make certain efforts. But of course, the majority of people, they're not going so deep in the searching of information, they're just watching what's happening on TV, whatever. So that's why, of course, this amount of propaganda decreased dramatically, and I believe it was a very positive move in Estonia, and I definitely urge other European Union countries to limit as much as possible Russian propaganda, because we should clearly understand, as I said, it's not freedom of speech at all. It's simply propaganda, it's disinformation, it's actually a weapon of information war, in which Russia is very, very active and very successful, unfortunately. And it's not only related to mass media, but also by social medias. You can see all these bot factories, which are very active on Facebook and Twitter, other social medias, and it's indeed a very big problem.